Well, a bit of a change up for this one. In order for me to tell you why I think this story is important, I kind of have to tell you how the story developed. We record these shows on Tuesday. I came into the office on Monday. My job is to stay on top of the news. Same for Steve and Scott. And when I got here, later in the afternoon, my operations manager told me about something that happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I said, what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin? Well, turns out the police officers shot a man in the back, Jacob Blake, and so I went looking for the video. But all the videos that I could see online took you to the point of the actual shooting and then froze, and basically kind of a sanitized version of this. So I went home and said to my wife, honey, we live in Los Angeles. I said, it's going to get really bad tonight. It's going to get bad. I saw the unedited video and I thought it was more condemning than the George Floyd video. And I was bracing for George Floyd squared. And that didn't happen. And so I want to talk about why it appears that it didn't happen. And I specifically do not want to talk about the police aspect of this. We've done hundreds of shows, it seems thousands of shows, it seems, on George Floyd and on COVID-19 and so on. So I want to look at the social response to this. Steve, when I saw this video and when I heard what had happened and I saw this guy, again, I don't want to get into the details of the event, but when you got a guy who's walking away from police officers, they grab his shirt, and when he continues to try and get in his car, they shoot him in the back, 2 officers 7 times. I thought, my God, the country is going to burn to the ground. I was surprised and shocked to see Black Lives Matter issue a statement that basically said we deeply protest this injustice and we would like to see the officers fired or in jail, which is a pretty reasonable statement given the incendiary nature of that video footage. And again, I couldn't find the video footage. And my point, Steve, is that I fully expected when I saw this that this was going to be on CNN 24 hours a day, every single half hour, nothing but re-looping this, and we were going to see all of this George Floyd stuff again. Now, I understand there's riots in Kenosha. I understand Kenosha's on fire, but Kenosha is on fire is not the same as LA and Denver and Miami and Atlanta and Chicago and everywhere else. So I'm curious to know why you think, at least as we record this story got treated so differently than the George Floyd story.
Who's left to engage? This is what occurred to me. Antifa and BLM are already fully in the field in places like Portland, where they've been going on for 70 or 80 days now. Denver had riots over the weekend. In fact, the mayor in Denver, I follow this on Colorado, came out on TV and said this is a riot and promised to do everything he could to shut it down, except for in Portland and, of course, Kenosha, where the thing actually happened. There's kind of been a sea change in attitude in the last couple of weeks. And
right. This is what interests me.
Yeah. And I think the DNC happening last week is a big part of it. If the Democrats are going to campaign on this idea that these are mostly peaceful protests, and keep in mind that mostly peaceful means partly violent, then they've got to start shutting this stuff down. It's not doing them any good. It's backfiring. And that's the Democratic side. The press, if I can offer you a difference without distinction, is in a somewhat different position, I think. Bill, I think the press has realized over these last few months that they have a civic responsibility to the nation to report the unvarnished and unbiased and unsensational truth, just the facts of each and every story, and then to let the chips fall where they may. If that helps Trump's reelection chances, then so be it. And
well, I disagree.
I'm totally kidding. I meant the first part of my answer. The stuff about the media. No. They're
well, you had me.
No, they're dialing it back because they absolutely have to. They're taking. Eisenhower, when he retired, warned us somewhat presciently about the military-industrial complex. Thank you. I forgot the phrase there for a moment. If Ike were retiring next January, or if he had retired 4 years ago, January, he would, or really almost any time in the last 30 years, he would have warned us instead about the Democrat media complex that's got such a firm grip on this nation. So no, I was completely being facetious about the media. I think they're irresponsible hacks for the most part when they're not just absolutely anti-American.
Well, Scott, let me just pick up on something that Steve said, because I think this is really the entire thing I find so interesting. He said Antifa is they're out on the streets every night. They're riot. There's unrest in, I don't want to call it unrest. There's rioting in Portland. It's been going on for 2 months now, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. And my entire point on this, and the reason I find this to be so important and so interesting, Scott, is because this video from Kenosha is rocket fuel for that.
Yeah.
Right? It's rocket fuel, and it's not being applied. And I have a theory about why, but I'd love to get your take on that.
Well, I'm not ready to jump to that conclusion just because I think it's been pretty close as we record this on Tuesday, the 25th, that it's been pretty close to the events, and it may take a little organizing. However, it does point up an interesting thing. If your theory is correct, which it well could be, it just goes to show that left alone, most people do not rush to the streets, even when they're upset about something.
That's the point.
That fire requires fuel, and if they don't
oxygen.
If they don't apply the fuel to the fire, then it naturally burns itself out. And I think that there's a certain level of protest fatigue that's got to set in, even among the most devoted people to the cause. But more importantly, maybe some of them are looking at it and saying, look, we've spent days, weeks, months in the streets rallying for something that we want to see happen, but there's no real program, there's no focus, there's no agenda, there's no bill, there's no legislation that we can get behind and invite people to become part of it. People don't want to join a riot in the streets. People want to join an effort that has a goal that looks like it stands a chance of accomplishment. So, it's obvious if you want, for example, in the 1960s to make sure that the obstacles to African Americans voting in the South are removed. I mean, that's a tangible goal where you can say, yes, a black man can walk into a polling place and be treated exactly like anybody else and have the right to vote without any kind of special tests or metrics that he's got to accomplish. So I think, and I'm hoping, that in this circumstance, people are looking at it and saying, you know what? We just expended all that energy for this, and here is another black man, abused by the police from their perspective, and we don't have the full details yet. What are we really trying to accomplish? How can we get it accomplished? Is street protest the most effective means of doing so? And if not, how do we approach this? Ultimately, when you're in a democratic republic, you've got to find a way to sway political majorities in your favor to accomplish things. And that, in general, doesn't happen with bricks and bats and accelerants in the streets.
I think that's still a somewhat lofty explanation of the motives. Folks, this is not an episode about police brutality or lack of brutality. It's not an episode about Black Lives Matter or whatever degree that cause has some legitimacy to it. It's about Black Lives Matter as an organization rather than as the kind of thing that any decent person wants, and that's they don't want people being racist, gunned down for no reason. The footage I saw was so astonishing to me that I couldn't believe it was real. I thought these must be actors. But my point is this: in the backstage discussion, we were talking about this, and I was talking about it with Scott earlier during the Bill Whittle Now taping, and he said maybe the news hasn't leaked out yet. Maybe the big rioting and stuff is going to come. And I said to myself and to him, I said, yes, the news hasn't leaked out yet. But that wasn't the case with the George Floyd incident. It wasn't a question of whether the news will leak out. It was everywhere all the time. And this tells me two things. The first thing it tells me is that, and Scott put this absolutely beautifully, the first thing it tells me is without the accelerant of 24-hour news coverage with the political agenda, What you get is outrage and concern and so on, but you don't get cities burning because these professional organizations were not engaged this time. And I'm talking about CNN, and I'm talking about Black Lives Matter and all the rest of this panoply of left-wing causes that are supported by George Soros and so on. When George Floyd happened, it was mobilized. And I didn't know it at the time. I suspected it, but I didn't have any evidence for it. I have evidence now that what happened with George Floyd was not, I'm not saying that there wasn't a just reason for it, but I am saying that all of these cities burning down, including about a quarter of a mile from my house in Los Angeles, was being fueled by the media and these political organizations, and they're not being fueled this time. So that's my first conclusion. My second conclusion is pure speculation, but I think it's the most likely case. If it turns out that this story does essentially just sort of stay where it is now, it's still only a few days later, but you know what? It happened Sunday afternoon. This is Tuesday. That's plenty of time for this to have been, plenty of time for this thing to have been pushed, accelerated, had oxygen and fuel sprayed on it. So my second question then is, if the George Floyd situation was so accelerated and so incendiary because of the coverage of it, why didn't it happen this time? And I don't give them any lofty motives. I personally think what has happened between George Floyd and what happened in Kenosha is that it has become apparent to Democrats, both in the news media, in organizations that are run like Black Lives Matter and all these Soros-led organizations. I think it's become clear to them in the interim that they lost so much support among their voting base, that so many lifelong Democrats peeled off when they saw that these cities were on fire and that the Democrats were basically cheerleading for it, that they suddenly realized, okay, we can't do this again. This is catastrophic for us at the polls. Catastrophic. That's my conclusion. My conclusion is that prior to George Floyd, the networks and these social organizations thought that having cities burn might be a real good thing for them and might hurt Donald Trump. But I think what they came out of it was realizing that no, most Americans don't want to see their cities on fire. Most Americans do care about injustice and don't like being called racist, and so on and so on and so on. And basically, I think the poll numbers were so dramatically, shockingly bad for them that they simply said, we can't do this again. There's no reason for us to do it when we thought there was a reason before. I do think it does show you how, when we look at what happened with George Floyd, how much of that was actual manipulation on the part of media and a number of people in cahoots with that, and yet another reason to be on your guard for how information is presented to people. And I don't know what else to add to that. It's an election year, and what we do in election years is we read tea leaves and try to figure things out. But my takeaway from all of this is that the George Floyd protests hurt the Democrats, the unrest and the riots hurt them so badly that this gift, if you're on the Black Lives Matter side, this gift was basically said, no, we can't do this again. This is killing us. That's my take on it. I may be wrong, but then again, I may not be. In either event, I suppose we'll find out in November. But until then, we'll be here every week, letting you know what's going on to the best of our abilities. Steve Green, Scott Ott, and myself. All these shows are made possible by the paying members at BillWhittle.com. And we'd love to have you become a member. Just go there and click the green button, and you'll be able to help keep stories like this coming out in the future. We'll see you next week on Right Angle.